The police don't carry guns. So, we've always been a nation of peace.
Yeah.
Never participated in war, except we, unfortunately, were among the nations that were on the list of, in the coalition of the willing. And that was actually a decision of 2 people in Iceland, and 99% of the nation were against it. And that sort of brings us to also the question of what is democracy. Is democracy something that can be controlled by 2 people, and people can change their mind every 4 years, or should democracy be something where the general public can actually effect decisions that will change their lives more often than just electing new people every 4 years?
Yes.
So it was an incredible victory for democracy that the president of Iceland rejected the so-called Icesave settlement and listened to the plea of the people to be allowed to vote on this.
When was this, by the way, Birgitta?
Okay, so this, maybe I should go in a little bit of background. Maybe I'm moving ahead too quickly. What happened was while we were laying down, in the collapse and had the terrorist act put on us, at the same time the British and the Dutch governments were blocking an IMF loan to Iceland. And the Icelandic government was forced to take an IMF loan, or it could not get help from, for example, the Nordic countries to deal with the immediate crisis.
Yes.
So the Nordic countries said, we will not, give you any loans. I mean, I can understand that to some degree, unless you go on an IMF program. And then they said, and the British and the Dutch, that we would not get the IMF, go into the IMF program unless we would agree to their terms when it came to the Icesave dispute. And the Icesave dispute, if we put it into into numbers, means that there were like almost 400,000 accounts, Icesave accounts, in the UK and in the Netherlands. And this was like high percentage accounts. You were taking a risk if you put your money in there. And the British and the Dutch failed to regulate this. So this bank was allowed to grow tremendously fast. And it was an internet bank. And so they demanded, when that bank collapsed, and God knows where the money went. I mean, the money probably went on to one of the offshore islands. They decided to pay out their own citizens, because these were banks that was related to an Icelandic bank that was owned by a guy named Björgúlfur Thor. They decided to pay out the minimum, which is around 21,000 euros, to each account holder, around 400,000 people. And then they sent Icelanders the bill and forced them to take it through using the IMF as sort of the, what do you call it, when somebody owes money to the mafia, they sent out somebody to break his arms if he doesn't pay it.
Yeah, the threat basically comes in then, the threat of violence there. Yeah,
I mean, the threat is, if you don't do it our way, you're not going to get any help at all.
Blackmail, pretty much.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they they signed an MOU about that Icelanders would actually, the Icelandic authorities signed an MOU to the Dutch that we would pay this.
A memorandum of understanding, correct?
Yeah. And however, there were some negotiations after that happening within the ECOFIN, which is an institute within the European Union. And we have to also bear in mind that one of the parties, the big parties in Iceland, is very keen on joining the European Union.
Yes.
And so it all sort of fits into some weird web that is very difficult to understand.
I don't want to cut you off to break your flow, Birgitta, but there's one thing here that reminds me of what happened in Sweden as well before we joined the European Union. We also had an economy that was opened up, if you will, to the world, and foreign companies could come in and invest in companies or buy companies and so forth. And George Soros, among other people as well, was one of these guys who bought up a lot of Swedish currency and almost managed to crash our economy. And a consequence of that was the Swedish people got scared of that, and consequently afterwards decided to go into the European Union. And I'm seeing a similar situation happening for you guys up in Iceland now, but actually more severe, because you're much lower in terms of population and GDP and things like that, right? Yeah,
it's absolutely. I mean, somebody said to me when it came to the Sweden and the EU application was that the only time there was majority for it was on the voting day.
Yeah, there you go.
Which is sort of sad. I mean, it's very sad.
Yes.
But the way the European Union has been also used in order to blackmail us into doing it the way the British and the Dutch want it is really sickening. And there were actually some leaks of papers reporting after the ECOFIN meeting, where the Icelandic financial minister was pressured into signing or accepting that we would not go to the courts with this. If we would go to the courts, they would not lift the blockage on the IMF loan. And that is completely wrong to me.
Yeah.
And we knew about this. There was actually, when we were dealing with the first settlement agreement with the British and the Dutch, we got to, everything is so much surrounded with secrecy, the way this thing has been handled.
Yes.
And the first disturbing thing was with the settlement was that, I had heard from one of the people that had been part of the negotiational team and sort of pushed out. One of the guys contacted me and he said they're going to be signing it in 2 days. So I made a public inquiry within the parliament asking the financial minister, is this true? Or is the contract being signed in a couple of days? And he said no. And the next day I got a phone call from the heads of state asking me to come to a meeting about iSafe. And I was told that the contract had been signed. And then they were not going to let us see the contract. None of the MPs that were supposed to be accepting this huge state guarantee were supposed to be getting to see the contract or the settlement agreement.
Okay.
So, but thank God to leaks, the contract was leaked to the internet.
This was on WikiLeaks, wasn't it? It was. You've had major support in terms of that website, in terms of documentation coming out there, right?
Yeah, and in fact, they're actually in Iceland now, the main editor for WikiLeaks. And we're working on a really interesting project, which I might talk about if we do another segment. But yes, we've been very lucky to have access to that because we live in such a small community and people are very much afraid to leak stuff to the local media.
Yes.
So it's been really helpful to have access to that sort of service, knowing that so far none of their sources have been revealed. So,
I mean, basically what we're talking about here is, you mentioned that Iceland has been a very peaceful country in that sense, no military, etc. But what we're looking at here is kind of an economic warfare. And the obvious question that comes up here is what the reason for this might be. Do you think that this is are these various governments, like the UK governments and the Dutch government, together with the IMF here now, then trying to take over resources on Iceland, or what do you see as the main motive for this type of action, Birgitta?
Well, if you study the history of the IMF and the way they operate, I was just watching a recent documentary from Jamaica like a year ago, is that the IMF usually participates or encourages that nations take on more debt than they can handle through a second party or a third party, such as the iSafe settlement, right? And then if you can't pay for example, if you have to use the IMF loan and you can't pay it back on time, then they will say, okay, you're getting a really good offer here for your national energy companies. You have to take it.